deals mainly on what? Biochemical life processes, energy conversions, functions, homeostasis, all of the above.
All of the above, Doc.
All of the above, Doc.
Oh, correct. So,
All the above, sir.
all the above. The concept of homeostasis in physiology is dealing with balance, dynamic equilibrium, equal concentrations of ions in and out of the cell, or optimum function.
Dynamic equilibrium.
Dynamic equilibrium.
The answer is dynamic equilibrium. Which ions is not abundant in the ECF? Sodium, potassium, calcium, bicarbonates. ECF.
Potassium.
Potassium. Correct. So perfect na mo ha. Two most important systems in the human body which is responsible for control systems: muscular, skeletal, lymphatic, respiratory, nervous, endocrine, cardio, respiratory. Which one is which?
Nervous and endocrine system.
Nervous and endocrine.
Correct. The meaning of internal environment the meaning of internal environment of the cells of our body is plasma in the blood, interstitial fluid, intracellular fluid, or extracellular fluid.
Intracellular.
Extracellular.
The answer is extracellular fluid. Daghan nanay na wrong. Which component of the cell does not belong to the group? Potassium, sodium, proteinates, DNA, RNA. To the
Sodium. Doc.
which component of the does not belong to the group? Potassium is inside. So sodium is outside, proteinates inside, DNA inside, RNA inside. So sodium does not belong to the group.
Doc, good morning, Doc.
Oh,
Ganina sa Doc ba test, extra ko answer, Doc, for intracellular lagi ang nakabutang na tama, Doc.
Yes, Doc. Kay intra ang nigawas, Doc. Wrong.
Yes, Doc.
wrong to siya. Oy, dili oy, ang
Yes,
akong
Doc.
ginagawa is
Extra akong gi-answer, Doc.
intracellular ang answer. O extracellular ang answer.
Okay, Doc.
Akong tanawon dito ha kay gi-check. Ako man ang gikuan. Ako man ang gi-checkan ang ECF man ang answer ECF.
Okay, Doc. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Okay, which components below does not belong to the group? Sodium out, chlorides out, calcium out, magnesium is in. So, except magnesium. Which part of the cell is responsible for modifications of protein products? Ribosome, nucleus, Golgi, endoplasmic.
Endoplasmic reticulum.
Oh, correct, endoplasmic reticulum. So, advance na mo ha. So, kinsay naka-perfect? Naay naka-perfect? Okay, magsugod na ta sa atong lecture, no? Based on the quiz sa murag first test, murag okay yan yung background na. So, those are very practical questions that are covered in the introductory part. Let me check. Sandali ha. I'm going to get my lecture. Why is it that I cannot access my kuan? Sandali ha, I cannot access my desktop. Ano naman yun? I cannot access my desktop. Sandali ha. Pictures in physiology. Sandali ha, kadut lang. Lectures in physiology. Can you see my slide?
Yes,
Okay.
Doc.
Time check is 8:22. So we have a little more than 30 minutes only to discuss a little of the introduction of cell physiology or physiology, general physiology. So the first unit of the book by Guyton deals with cell and cell physiology or cellular physiology. So let's try to look at the first topic is on, so the first topic, functional organization of the body and control of the internal environment. Chapter 2 is cell and its functions. Chapter 3 is genetic control and protein synthesis. And then I think transport of molecules sa chapter 4 or 5. So the functional organization of the human body and the control of the internal environment. So the goal of physiology is always to explain the physical and chemical mechanisms of our body that are responsible for the origin, the development, and progression of life. So the topic on physiology even includes the origin and progression of life, meaning to say, even in the embryonic stage, you still have to deal with or look at the progression of life as it grows from a single cell, fertilized by the sperm cell, become a zygote, and then develop into an embryo, and then stage by stage up to full development as a human being. So physiology also deals with that, origin, development, and progression of life. Origin, development, and progression of life. You take note of that. Each type of life, whether it is a simple bacteria or virus, to the largest animal or tree, or the complicated human being, is covered in physiology to talk about the functional characteristics of every type of life. So we have the cell physiology, the physiology of the bacteria, the physiology of the virus, plant physiology, and human physiology, talking about functional characteristics of the human body. So in human physiology, we attempt to explain the specific characteristics and discuss the mechanisms by which the human body is made and make into a living being. So take note, physical characteristics, biochemical characteristics that make the living being. Another is to discuss the very fact that we remain alive is almost beyond our control. For hunger, for example, is a need, or you feel hungry, so that your body will tell you to look for food. And fear, if you feel the fear, that's still a physiological mechanism, you tend to seek refuge as a response to your fear. So if you're afraid, that is still a physiological mechanism, and that being afraid or having a fear needs a refuge, and which is actually a physiological response. So seeking refuge or taking food is a response to that particular event that you feel in your body, and you respond to it in order to continue on living. Another is, in physiology, sensations, different sensations. Sensation, for example, for warm, or cold. If you feel cold, you seek for warmth. So that is a physiological response. Other process to seek fellowship and to reproduce. So those are responses. So responses to some kind of stimulus, and you feel it in you, and responding to that stimulus is a physiological process. So physiology is really encompassing, no? The feeling, the response requires physiological mechanisms and physiological explanation. In physiology, the human being is actually an automaton. So within the context of physiology, the human body is like an automaton. The fact that we are sensing, we sense it, we feel it, and knowledgeable beings is part of being automatons or automatic, a sequence of life, and these are special attributes that will allow us to exist under varying conditions. So our body, our cell is subjected to different conditions, and how the cell respond to that condition is a subject in physiology. So that's why you will notice that physiology is the embodiment of medicine. If you want to take up medicine, physiology is a fundamental subject that will allow you to understand the phenomenon called life at the cellular and molecular level. So in short, occurrences in clinical manifestations can be explained in physiology at the cellular and molecular level. So that if you are good in physiology, you are good in biochemistry, you will become a very good doctor. Because these two subjects, physiology and biochemistry, are two important subjects of medicine that will allow you to understand the basic foundations of medical sciences. So medical science is more of medicine is more of an art of treating. The hard science in medicine is biochemistry and physiology, and including pharmacology. So the hardest science in medicine is biochemistry and physiology. If you are good in biochemistry, you will eventually be very good in physiology. So these are the two subjects in medicine that are very, very important, because almost all aspects of our life must be explained at the cellular, molecular level, and that is biochemistry and physiology. So as a cell is a living unit. Cell as a living structural unit of all the body, because the cell theory states that all living things have cells. So the human is a living organism. So our basic fundamental unit is also the cell. So the basic living unit of the body is the cell. So calculated to about 25 trillion cells of red blood cells, or 75 trillion cells of other cells. We have 100 billion cells of neurons in our brain, calculated to be about 100 to 200 trillion cells throughout the body. So it's about 200 trillion cells, not just to 100 trillion, but 200 trillion cells. Each has its own functional characteristic and properties. So the cells in the brain has different functional properties compared it with the cells in the liver, the cells in the stomach, the cells in the kidney, the cells in the heart. Each type of cell in the body has its own functional characteristics. And the functional characteristics, properties of the cell, or the structural or the cytological properties of the cell, reveals the function of that particular cell, eventually reveals the functional properties of that particular organ or tissue. So that is it, no? So the general chemical mechanisms for changing nutrients from food to energy, all the food like carbohydrates, proteins, fatty acids are converted into energy. Basically, is all the same in all cells. So the production of energy in the brain is the same mechanism of production of energy in all the cells of our body, including our skin, our muscles, the heart muscles, the lung muscles. All types of cells in the body has a uniform general chemical mechanisms converting energy or converting food or nutrients into energy. So basically all cells perform the same energy conversions, and all the cells will deliver the end products of their chemical reactions into the blood and into the surrounding fluids all throughout the body. So now we go to the extracellular fluid, which is actually the extracellular fluid, or the ECF. the ECF, in the pretest that I gave you, is referred to as the internal environment. So the conditions by which the cell is suspended in a fluid is the internal environment. And that comprises about 60 to 70% of the adult human body is fluid, where it is composed mainly of water, the ions and other particulates or oncogenic molecules or osmotic particles or osmoles or solutes that are suspended in water, and that is where you can find the internal environment by which the cell is suspended from or suspended into. So almost all of the fluid is inside, although most of the fluid is inside the cells, you call it the intracellular fluid, about 1/3 is in the spaces outside the cell and is called extracellular fluid. So the extracellular fluid is what we call as the internal environment. So the ECF is considered to be the internal environment. So this extracellular fluid is in constant motion throughout the body. So it is a dynamic, that's why it's called dynamic equilibrium. It is transported into the blood and then and then it goes into the tissues via the diffusion in the capillary walls. So those materials suspended in the extracellular fluid are then transported into the cells, or you call it transported into the intracellular component of the cell via diffusion through the capillary walls of our tissues. So the capillary wall is now a very important, what you call, medium by which exchanges of molecules inside the cell and outside the cell is through the exchanges in the capillary walls of our body. So all cells therefore live essentially the same environment. So as I said, all the cells of our body are suspended in what you call extracellular fluid. So that is where our cell is surrounded at. All the cells of our body is surrounded by an extracellular fluid. For this reason, the extracellular fluid is also known as the internal environment of the body, or milieu intérieur, as it was introduced 100 years ago by the great 19th century French physiologist Claude Bernard. So Claude Bernard introduced the term internal milieu or internal environment, referring to the extracellular fluid where the cell is suspended. So our cell is suspended in a fluid called internal milieu or milieu intérieur, which is referred to as the extracellular fluid or the ECF. So let's now try to define between the ECF and the ICF. ECF means extracellular fluid, while ICF refers to intracellular fluids. So the extracellular fluid of our body, where it is referred to as the internal milieu or milieu intérieur, has large amount of sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate ions. Calcium is also abundant in the ECF compared to ICF. But theoretically, there are more calcium inside the cell than outside. However, the calcium is sequestered in the endoplasmic reticulum in the non-muscles and in the sarcoplasmic reticulum in the muscle cells. So calcium, though it is very abundant inside the cell through the endoplasmic reticulum and the sarcoplasmic reticulum, in the context of intracellular fluid, there are more calcium in the ECF compared to the calcium of the ICF. Take note of that, ha, kay. There is a difference between ICF and ECF. So if you look at the contents of calcium in the ECF compared to the ICF, there are more concentrations of calcium in the ECF than in the ICF. But in reality, as I said, there are more calcium inside the cell, but sequestered only in the endoplasmic reticulum and sarcoplasmic reticulum. That is the reason why it is less in comparison with ECF. So I repeat, in terms of concentration of calcium ions in the ECF, ECF has more calcium ions than ICF. However, there are more calcium inside the cell than outside the cell. But the calcium inside the cell is sequestered into the endoplasmic reticulum and sarcoplasmic reticulum. So under ordinary circumstance, therefore, if you reckon on the fluid, if you're referring to the fluid, there is less calcium in the fluid than the fluid. There are more calcium in the fluid of the extracellular fluid. Plus, what are other components that are abundant outside the cell? The nutrients such as oxygen, glucose, and fatty acids, and amino acids are also abundant in the ECF because after digestion of food in the intestine, it is now conveyed into the blood. So therefore, in the ECF, there are more amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. Carbon dioxide is also abundant because that is where the carbon dioxide is supposed to be discharged from the mitochondria to the blood and onto the lungs. Other waste products are also found in the ECF. So most waste products are already found in the ECF coming from the inside the cell. They are now discharged into the ECF for transport into the organ where they are eliminated. So for excess water, excess salt, excess of everything is actually eliminated in the urine, or some food are modified in the liver. So the intracellular fluid, on the other hand, what are the components that are abundant inside the fluid, the ICF? You have potassium is abundant, magnesium is abundant, phosphate ions are abundant because these phosphate ions are found in the either DNA and RNA because the DNA and RNA are laden with phosphate sugar backbone. That's why there are more phosphates inside the cell than outside the cell. And these phosphate ions are negatively charged. That's why inside the cell is largely negative in potential. So take note of this. Inside the cell is always negative because of proteinates and the DNA and RNA. DNA and RNA are negatively charged molecules and they are impermeable to the membrane. Therefore, they are retained inside the cell. So this explains the reason why inside the cell is largely negatively charged because of DNA, RNA, and proteinates. Largely negatively charged molecules such as DNA and RNA makes the cell more negative inside. Take note of that. More cell outside is more positive because there are more sodium ion in the outside the cell compared to inside. So that makes the cell more positive outside and more negative inside because of nucleic acids and proteinates. Take note of that. Under physiological condition, at resting stage, the cell is always negative. Take note of that. That should be instill it into your mind that in normal condition, if the cell is at rest, the cell is always negatively charged inside and positively charged outside. Take note of that because that is the fundamental concept of physiology. So any alteration of that will make the cell either active or inactive, and if it is not restored to normal, then it will create what you call a pathologic condition. So take note that in physiology, you look at the normal condition. So take note that our body has to maintain a normal condition at all times. Otherwise, the cell is said to be clinically dead if the ions are not maintained at its proper condition. So I repeat, the condition of the cell is negative inside and positive outside. That is the homeostatic condition of the cell. That is the physiological condition of the cell. So if you are going to reckon it, the physiological condition of the cell at normal level, it's always negative inside and always positive outside. That is the physiological optimal condition of the cell at rest. So take note, I underscore the word at rest. So the cell at rest is always negatively charged inside and cell at rest is positively charged outside because of the contents of the ions and the components of the ICF compared to the components of ECF. Did you understand that? Nakuha?
Yes, Doc.
Nakuha ba?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Is it very clear to you now?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
So
Yes, Doc.
under physiological condition, we always attempt to restore the conditions of the resting potential of the cell. I repeat, the resting potential of the cell must be restored at all times in order for the body to be considered at the homeostatic level. So take note now, homeostatic, I now use the word homeostatic level referring to the original concentrations of ions in the ECF and the ICF. So when you talk about homeostasis, therefore, you are talking about the dynamic equilibrium between the contents of ion inside and the contents of ion outside. Homeostasis does not mean equal, but homeostasis means maintaining the inequalities of concentration, meaning more sodium outside, more potassium inside, less sodium inside, and more potassium inside, less potassium outside. That is now the optimal condition and the cell at rest. So that is what you call the homeostasis. So therefore, if you are going to say maintain the homeostasis, meaning you maintain the concentration and the qualities of ions inside the cell. Not only the concentration, but also the ions itself. What type of ions are present inside and what type of ions that are found outside under respective concentration, that is what we're referring to as the homeostatic level or dynamic equilibrium. So the key concept, all physiological functions therefore are performed by specific anatomical structures. So we look at it like, for example, the anatomical structure of the cell. You have the cell membrane. In cytology, the cell membrane controls the movement of ions into or out of the cell. That is now the microanatomy or the histological structures or cytological structure that control the physiological function of the cell. The principle of complementarity says that structure and function has a relationship. It has this kind of function because it has that kind of structure. That is what we call the subject, structure and function, structure, anatomy, function, physiology. That's why anatomy and physiology are two subjects that are complementary to each other. We have this kind of function because we have that kind of structure. Function always refer to structure, and structure also refer to function. What a structure can do is depending on the specific form. And then that specific structure reveal a specific function. Okay? So we have 11 organ systems in our body. integumentary system that refers to the skin and the accessory like the hairs and the nails, or that integuments and what you call the the keratin fibers. Our nails and hairs are keratins, so it is present in the integument. It covers the body. We have the nervous system, which is composed of the neurons, the skeletal system composed of the bones, the endocrine system is composed of the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the pancreas, the what you call this, the adrenal gland, the ovary and the testes, the thymus and other glands that are secreting hormones. So it is the endocrine that secretes the hormone. The nervous secretes the neurotransmitters. So two of the most important systems in controlling body function or coordinating body function are the nervous and the endocrine system. The muscular and skeletal system only respond to the endocrine and nervous system. Cardiovascular also respond to the nervous. Cardiovascular also respond to endocrine. Lymphatic responds to nervous and endocrine. The urinary system responds also to the nervous as well as to the endocrine. Respiratory system responds to nervous and endocrine system. The reproductive system responds to endocrine and nervous system. The digestive system biochemically responds to the endocrine as well as to the nervous system. That's why the nervous system and the endocrine system are the two systems in our body that coordinates body functions that will now coordinate with the other systems, all the others. So the two system, nervous and endocrine, controls all the other systems in the body. So at the microscopic level, we have the cytology or the study of cells and histology or the study of tissue. As we all know that tissues are defined as group of cells, group of similar cells with similar structures and therefore similar function. So as a tissue will now function as one, and it may comprise the characteristic of that particular organ in the body. So the structure of the organ is always spelled out by the cytological properties of that particular organ. So we have the physiology is talking about the function as revealed by the structure. It considers the operation of the specific organ systems like the renal kidney or the tubules are used to the properties of the cells in the tubule either eliminates the water or reabsorb some nutrients back to the blood. So the kidney has a particular group of tissues responsible for a specific function in order for the kidney to function as a whole. So neurophysiology is actually between neurons and the function. So neurons control all the other parts of the body. That's why neurophysiology is also a very important aspect in physiology, the workings of the nervous system in coordinating all the other parts of the other parts of the human body. The cardiovascular system also respond to the neurophysiological mechanisms. Operations of the heart and blood vessels responds to the nervous control and endocrine control also. So physiology focuses on the functions often at the cellular and molecular level. So for us to be able to understand very well about the function of the organ, we look at the individual cellular characteristics, because the individual cellular characteristics of each tissue in the organ reveals a particular specific function. That's why there is a correlation between structure and function. So anatomical organization reveals a function. So we start from the smallest to the largest. So we discussed the 6 levels of organization of our body. There are 6 levels organization of our body. The first level is known as the atomic or the chemical level, where it is composed of atoms and molecules. Then these atoms and molecules, components of which will comprise what you call organized into a cell. So that's why it's called as a cellular level. So start with the chemical level, the first level, and then the cellular level. When the cells are grouped into tissue, you call it tissue level. Different groups of cells perform a different function in an organ. So when like the kidney as an organ has several tissues in it, and each tissue performs a different function. Different tissue, therefore, in the particular organ, then you form what you call the organ level. You have the heart as an organ, the liver as an organ, the stomach as an organ, small intestine as an organ. So, and they are composed of different types of tissues that perform different specific function. They also perform common functions such as transport of molecules into or out of the cell is basically the same. So when the organ system, like digestive system, you have cardiovascular system, the lymphatic system, the what you call muscular and skeletal system, and so on and so forth, consist of different organs that work closely together to form as an organ system. Like for example, digestive system is composed of several organs. Like you have the tongue, you have the esophagus, you have the stomach, you have the small intestine, large intestine, the rectum and the anus, and so on and so forth. So different organ system are composed of different cellular tissues in it. So there are 6 levels of organization. Look at it here. The first level is chemical, the second is cellular, the third is tissue, the fourth is organ, the fifth is organ system, and the 6th level is the organismal level. Going outside, you have the organismal level working together, and outside the organism is the environment. We call it ecological level. So ecological level is the 7th level. How the organisms interact with the environment is known as ecological response, because our genetic material respond with the environment. So the behavior of one person, the behavior of one organism can be attributed at the genetic level, but the genes interact with ecological environment. That's why we have the ecological level. So we are not isolated because we are surrounded by the environment. We call it the abiotic factors. So the key concept, these 11 organ systems working together and integrated into a particular functional human body, and that is a very, very complicated system, because physiology therefore is an integration of body functions. That's why when you discuss medicine, when you discuss a disease, you don't only refer the disease to one organ, you don't only refer to one tissue, but integrate it as a whole. That's why very difficult gyud ang medicine, kay labi na gyud ang internal medicine, because you are integrating all the 11 organ systems of our body, including the interaction with the environment. That's why physiology is really very, very difficult subject. That's why there are people that are failing in this subject, because physiology is a really very, very difficult subject, because no two individuals have uniform physiological processes. Although we have universal processes, but we differ in minute details. We are universally the same at the molecular level, but we are totally different at the different organ systems or tissue level. And all these are integrated into the function and we call it physiology. So physiology is an integration subject. So all the organ systems are integrated into one whole organism or one body. So therefore now, we now take into consideration the concept of homeostasis, the ability to maintain relatively, now we see, I emphasized this very well earlier, that homeostasis is the ability to maintain relatively stable internal environment. Therefore, you are talking about the extracellular fluid and the components thereof, because this internal environment is also being surrounded with the ever-changing environment. All the body systems working together as one, maintaining a stable internal condition in responding to external and internal changes within a normal range. So the body responds, and within a normal range, they control the temperature, the fluid balance, etc., etc. And whether there is a change in temperature or change in environment, the body has to maintain within the normal range in order to be considered optimal conditions or physiological condition. Therefore, the internal environment of the body is the dynamic state of equilibrium. Meaning to say, when you say dynamic, that means referring to the interaction of the cell outside of itself, no? That's why we use the word dynamic, because dynamic means there is some form of movement of ions inside, movements of ion going outside, and so on and so forth. Failure to respond correctly to this particular, or failure to maintain within a normal range, will now result to a disease. That's why in physiology, we look at the normal range of the concentrations of ions in order to be considered homeostatic level. Remember, homeostasis refer to optimal physiological conditions of the internal environment, referring to the extracellular fluid, the contents and its concentration, therefore, which is different from the inside the cell. So the homeostatic control mechanisms, this is the point at which I have stopped my lecture. So pamabalance mo so that you have a balanced footing with other section. We will start the lecture next meeting about the homeostatic control mechanisms. You prepare for a pre-test again for next meeting. Our next meeting is on Thursday, so there will be another short quiz next meeting. So take note of that. Thank you very much and good morning. Do you have any questions? Is my lecture clear to you?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Yes,
Doc.
Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Nasabtan ba? Naintindihan ba? Did you
Yes po, Doc.
understand?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Is clear.
Overwhelming.
Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you, Doc.
And I hope that you have
Thank you,
established
Thank you, Doc.
the fundamental principle, the fundamental concepts in physiology revolving around homeostasis and dynamic equilibrium. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Have a
Thank you,
nice day, Doc.
Doc.
Morning, Doc.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you,
Inside,
Doc.
which sections today has a laboratory?
We haven't received links, Doc, sa
Yes, Doc.
lab. Pero nag-chat ko sa biochem na secretary kay wala daw may lab karon.
O, wala pa mo lab sa biochem.
Yes, Doc.
Sa physiology, wala pa po. Ingon ni Dr. Veloso. Dr. Veloso said, the orientation in physiology will be next week pa. So, for our laboratory period sa physiology, I can come in, pero gikapoy naman ko next time na lang.
Okay, Doc. Sige, Doc.
I
Okay,
am
Doc.
already tired, so I will just take rest. So next meeting na lang, mag-arrange lang ko kung dili na ako mahuman akong lecture within my time frame. I will just schedule a make-up lecture kung di na ako mahuman. So right now, next meeting ako pa rin. So I will finish until chapter 4 of the book of Gaiton. Prepare always for a short quiz before the beginning of classes. That is my style. Pre-test or sometimes post-test. Okay? So you read in advance so that you will be able to answer my pre-test. Okay?
Yes, Doc.
Read advanced chapters. Advanced chapter dili lang kay kanang chapter, no? Immediate chapter. You read in advance because sometimes I ask questions from the succeeding chapter. Okay?
Sir,
Yes, Doc.
So
thank
thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much. Thank you
I
very
have
much.
one
I'm
question.
going to, and you may now exit. We don't have a laboratory meeting today. We will arrange for a laboratory meeting next week. Thank you very much again. Bye-bye.
Doc, I have a
Bye, Doc.
question.
Do you have a question?
Katong
Yes.
sa quiz ganiha, Doc, pa kay na late lang og submit pero ma-count gyud po na siya, Doc.
Tanaw na ako. Usahay late ang giingon diha pero na-submit na to di ay. Tanaw lang na ako. Ako lang is, akong i-summarize unya and then akong i-print ang output unya. Mangutana lang mo sa secretary kay akong tagaan siya kung unsay resulta or ambot og tagaan ba mo sa result sa Google Classroom? Are you
Okay,
given-
naka-mark raman siya, Doc, na hand in late daw.
di ay. Sige lang. Tanaw
sige,
lang
Doc.
ako. Sige.
Thank you, Doc.
Tuazon. O sige. Who else has question? Now, anybody has question? Mayroon pa mga question? If none, then I bid goodbye to all of you in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3.
One thing, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Do you still have questions?
The endocrine is, the cardiovascular is for endocrine na siya, Doc, no? Dili siya mo respond sa nervous.
Ang endocrine?
Yes, Doc, cardiovascular system.
The cardiovascular system responds both endocrine and neurons, nervous.
Okay. Thank you, Doc.
I have one question outside this related to the short quiz.
I cannot hear you. Louder, please.
I mean, I have one questions for the short quizzes. Those marks will be counted at the end of the course, for the overall.
Yes, it will be counted as your quiz. And
Okay.
remember this. That's why I want you to study in advance because 40% of your grade in the lecture comes from the quiz. 40%. That's a great amount.
Yes,
I
sir.
repeat,
That's a huge amount.
40% of your grade in the lecture part comes from quizzes, and the pre-test and post-test comprise your quizzes. So you better make good with that. Did you get it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Do you have other questions and clarifications? Do not take my pre-test and post-test for granted. Kasi at the end of the lecture, I also have what you call the unit examination. And we have the pre-test and we have the unit examination. Okay? And unit examination is a major exam. By the way, there is no excuse for quizzes. You can have excuse or you can file an excuse for major exam but not in quizzes. So if you miss the quiz, you miss it forever na. Sayang. So you better not absent because there are no what you call make-up quiz. There is no such thing as make-up quiz. But for major exam, you can have your special exam. But for major quiz, you have no special quiz. Except for ganina, yung mga hindi nakapasok might give you a special one. Kasi unfair naman. Okay? Did you understand?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
So, off na ko ha. Bye-bye.
Bye, Doc.
Bye,
Bye,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you, Doc. Bye, Doc.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Doc.
Thank you.
Bye, Doc. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.